Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of." She screamed across the driveway, loud enough for 3 houses to hear and careless enough to forget that every word was being recorded. Malcolm Reed did not answer. He just stood in his doorway with his hands resting at his sides, still as a fence post, watching the woman across the street hand him the one thing she should never have given a patient man: evidence. What Vanessa Whitmore did not know was that her campaign to make Malcolm look dangerous was about to expose 18 months of stolen internet, illegal rental income, and a secret hidden behind her basement door. Malcolm was 59 years old, broad-shouldered, soft-spoken, and built like a man who had spent half his life crawling beneath server racks with a flashlight between his teeth. For 31 years, he worked as a network systems engineer for Triangle Regional Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he designed the infrastructure that allowed surgeons, nurses, radiologists, and emergency departments to share information without delay. If a trauma patient arrived at midnight and a doctor needed an image from another building in less than 5 seconds, Malcolm was one of the reasons it happened. He never bragged about it, never wore his credentials like a badge. And if you asked what he did for a living, he usually shrugged and said, "I kept the computers from arguing with each other." He had retired 2 years earlier, not because he was ready, but because his wife Evelyn had developed ovarian cancer and the appointments became more important than the meetings. Evelyn was the kind of woman who sang while washing dishes, laughed before finishing her own jokes, and grew gardenias along the back fence because she said every home should smell like someone was glad to be there. She fought for 11 months, then died on a rainy morning in February, while Malcolm sat beside her holding a paper cup of coffee he never drank. 16 months had passed, but her folding walker still stood behind the bedroom door, and her favorite cardigan still hung on the chair by the window, because grief does not clean up after itself. It just moves things around and waits for you to notice. Malcolm lived alone in Hawthorne Glen, a quiet development of 38 homes outside Raleigh, all brick fronts, clipped hedges, matching mailboxes, and enough beige siding to make a person question whether color had been outlawed. The neighborhood association had collapsed 3 years earlier after the president was caught paying his landscaping company with community funds. And after that, nobody wanted the job. The entrance sign leaned slightly to the left. The irrigation system worked whenever it felt emotionally prepared, and the neighborhood message board had been taken over by Vanessa Whitmore, a 54-year-old former luxury real estate agent with a white Mercedes, a permanent spray tan, and the confident expression of someone who believed rules were simply suggestions for other people. Vanessa had not been elected to anything, but she created a private Facebook group, organized street patrols no one requested, and began sending weekly emails titled Community Standards Update, which was a fancy way of saying she had driven around looking for trash cans left out too long. Her husband Craig worked as a residential code inspector for Wake County, a quiet, tired man who looked as though he had spent 25 years apologizing without moving his lips. Vanessa liked control because control made her feel important, and Hawthorne Glen had provided her with an entire stage and no director. Malcolm mostly ignored her. He tended Evelyn's gardenias every morning, repaired old radios in the garage, and spoke to his daughter Simone every Sunday night. Simone lived in Charlotte and raised her 17-year-old son Jordan, who came to stay with Malcolm each summer. Jordan loved computers, basketball, and asking questions at exactly the moment Malcolm sat down. He was arriving the following week for an online coding program, so Malcolm decided to replace his aging router and strengthen the Wi-Fi signal in the guest room. On a Tuesday afternoon, he carried a mesh router, a small directional antenna, and a laptop onto the front porch. Nothing mysterious, nothing illegal, just ordinary equipment you could order online while eating cereal. The heat pressed down like a wet blanket. Cicadas screamed from the trees, and Evelyn's gardenias filled the yard with that sweet, heavy scent Malcolm still associated with her hands. He was halfway through configuring the new network when Vanessa returned from one of her neighborhood walks, wearing pale blue leggings, oversized sunglasses, and earbuds that probably cost more than Malcolm's first car. She slowed down when she saw him, stared at the cables, then looked toward his garage as if she had discovered a missile silo. Malcolm gave her a polite nod. Vanessa did not nod back. She went inside, poured something pink into a metal tumbler, and called 911. 2 patrol cars arrived 13 minutes later. Officer Rachel Monroe stepped out first, calm and professional, followed by Officer Andre Bell, A younger officer with a trimmed beard and the curious eyes of someone who actually listened before deciding what happened. Vanessa met them at the curb with one hand pressed to her chest. "Thank goodness," she said, lowering her voice as though Malcolm might be able to intercept it through the atmosphere. "He's been setting up some kind of electronic equipment all afternoon, and I am concerned he may be monitoring nearby homes." Officer Monroe glanced toward Malcolm's porch, where he sat beside a cardboard box clearly labeled Home Wi-Fi System. "What makes you think he is monitoring anyone, ma'am?" Vanessa leaned closer. "I know what hacking equipment looks like. I watch documentaries." The officers walked across the street. Malcolm stood slowly, keeping both hands visible, a habit his father had taught him when he was 12 years old after a deputy stopped them outside a hardware store and demanded proof that the truck they were driving belonged to them. "Good afternoon, officers," Malcolm said. "This is my home. I am installing a new wireless router for my grandson." He offered his identification before they asked. Officer Monroe checked the address, then looked at the equipment. Officer Bell crouched beside the router and smiled. "Is that a unified gateway?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "You know your hardware. I built a little server rack in my apartment," Bell said. "My girlfriend hates the blinking lights." That was the moment Vanessa's story began to sag under its own weight. Officer Monroe returned to the curb to finish taking her statement while Officer Bell asked Malcolm whether he had noticed any strange traffic on his old network. Malcolm hesitated. Evelyn had always handled the household passwords, and after she died, he had left the network unsecured longer than he should have, because changing it felt like erasing one more thing she had touched. Bell asked permission to view the connected device history. Malcolm agreed and opened the router dashboard. The list appeared on the screen, and Bell stopped smiling. "Mr. Reed, you said you live alone?" Malcolm nodded. Bell scrolled slowly. There were 19 unfamiliar devices connected during the previous month. Phones, tablets, laptops, streaming boxes, none belonging to Malcolm. One device was labeled Vanessa iPad, another read Craig County laptop. The rest had generic names, the kind of names devices carry when people arrive somewhere for a weekend and connect without thinking. Bell called Monroe back over. She studied the list, then looked across the street at Vanessa, who was still talking with both hands and pointing toward Malcolm's house like she was explaining a crime scene. "That is a lot of traffic for a man who lives alone," Monroe said. Malcolm stared at the screen. 19 strangers inside a network that belonged to him, a network attached to his printer, his personal files, Evelyn's medical records, and years of family photographs. Officer Bell handed him a card. "Change the password today," he said, "and save these logs. Something here is not right." Malcolm watched the patrol cars leave, then looked across the street. Vanessa stood in her driveway with her arms folded, wearing the satisfied smile of someone who believed she had successfully warned the authorities about him. Malcolm said nothing, but that evening he changed the Wi-Fi password, exported the connection history, and opened an old black notebook from his hospital days. At the top of the first page, he wrote the date, the time, and one sentence. "Vanessa Whitmore called the police because I installed a router on my own porch." Then, beneath it, he wrote the names of 19 devices, and before the ink had dried, 3 lights went dark in Vanessa's basement. By 7 the next morning, Vanessa had already posted in the Hawthorne Glen Facebook group, "Just a friendly warning, neighbors. Someone in the community has recently altered wireless signals without notice. If your devices are acting strangely, please document it." And Malcolm read the post twice while drinking coffee from Evelyn's old blue mug, the one with a chip near the handle that she had refused to throw away because she said imperfections were how objects proved they had lived. He did not respond, even when 3 neighbors added worried comments, and one man named Brett Lawson wrote, "I knew something felt off over there," because Malcolm had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose control of a situation was to start defending yourself before you understood what the other person was hiding. Instead, he opened the router logs and began sorting the unfamiliar devices by date and time, and after 30 minutes, the pattern became almost embarrassingly obvious. 2 or 3 new phones would connect on Friday evening, remain active through Saturday, then disappear before noon on Sunday, the same cycle repeating every weekend for months. These were not random neighbors borrowing a signal from the sidewalk. These were guests arriving and leaving on a schedule. Later that afternoon, Malcolm walked to the shared mailbox station and found Vanessa waiting beside it in a white tennis skirt and sunglasses large enough to qualify as home improvement materials. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided they are being reasonable. "Malcolm," she said, "I hope you understand why people are concerned." "People," he repeated. "Several people." She tapped one polished fingernail against her tumbler. "Their television stopped streaming last night, and one resident lost access to her tablet." "That is interesting," Malcolm said, "because I changed the password on my private internet connection." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Private is a strong word in a connected community." "No," Malcolm said. "Private is a precise word." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You cannot just disrupt services people depend on." Malcolm looked at her for a moment, then glanced across the street toward her basement windows. "Are you saying people depend on my internet service?" Vanessa blinked, and for half a second, the confidence slipped, but she recovered quickly. "I am saying good neighbors communicate before making changes that affect others." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Good neighbors usually ask before using something that belongs to someone else." He walked away before she could answer, and behind him, he heard the sharp click of her tumbler hitting the metal mailbox as her hand tightened around it. That evening, Jordan arrived from Charlotte carrying a backpack, a basketball, and enough snack food to survive a regional emergency. He hugged Malcolm hard, then immediately asked for the Wi-Fi password. Malcolm gave him the new one, watched him connect, and felt a strange ache when Jordan said the signal was great because that was why any of this had started in the first place. One grandfather trying to make sure his grandson could attend a coding class without the screen freezing. At dinner, Jordan noticed a black notebook beside Malcolm's plate and asked what it was. "Just notes," Malcolm said. Jordan studied him. "Mom says when you say just notes, somebody is about to regret something." Malcolm almost laughed. "Your mother talks too much." The next day, a postal carrier named Tasha Green stopped Malcolm near the curb. She was 26, quick on her feet, and had delivered mail in Hawthorne Glen for almost 3 years. She glanced toward Vanessa's house before speaking. "Mr. Reed, I heard police were here last week." Malcolm nodded. Tasha shifted the mail bundle against her hip. "Vanessa filed a complaint against me in May. Said I was spending too much time at certain houses. Said I made residents uncomfortable." "Which houses?" Malcolm asked. "Yours, the Parkers, and the Holloways." Malcolm knew both families, and all 3 households were black. "Did she name anyone else?" "No, sir. My supervisor dismissed it, but I thought you should know." Malcolm opened the notebook and wrote down the date, the time, and Tasha's exact words. That was when Jordan came outside, saw the notebook, saw the way Tasha kept checking Vanessa's windows, and understood that this was bigger than a broken streaming connection. Over the next week, Vanessa escalated. She announced the creation of a Hawthorne Glen Technology Safety Committee, which consisted of Vanessa, a folding chair, and what appeared to be unlimited free time. She emailed residents a proposed policy requiring homeowners to register antennas, rotors, security cameras, and any device capable of transmitting a signal. The document had no legal authority, but it carried Craig's County logo in the footer, which made it look official enough to frighten people who did not read carefully. Then Craig appeared at Malcolm's front door with a clipboard and his county identification badge. "We received a complaint about possible commercial networking equipment operating from this residence," he said. Malcolm looked past him toward Vanessa, who stood at the end of her driveway pretending to water a hydrangea that had been dead since April. "Was the complaint anonymous?" Malcolm asked. Craig cleared his throat. "I am not at liberty to discuss that." Malcolm let him inside because there was nothing to hide, and Craig found exactly what Officer Bell had found: a home office, a printer, a consumer router, a shelf of technical manuals, and a coffee mug that read, "I turn it off and back on." He opened the garage, looked at Malcolm's workbench, and stared for several seconds at a half-built birdhouse. "Is the birdhouse transmitting signals too?" Malcolm asked. Craig lowered his clipboard. "No findings," he said quietly, then left without meeting Malcolm's eyes. That night, Jordan searched the internet for short-term rental listings near Hawthorne Glen. Malcolm had not asked him to, but teenagers hear the word pattern and treat it like a dare. 20 minutes later, Jordan called from the guest room. "Grandpa, come look at this." On his laptop was a cash travel listing titled Quiet Garden Suite near Raleigh. Private entrance, queen bed, kitchenette, fast Wi-Fi included. The address was hidden, but the photographs showed a gray stone accent wall, black metal shelves, and a brass light fixture Malcolm had seen through Vanessa's basement window dozens of times. One photograph even captured part of the backyard fence, and beyond it stood Evelyn's gardenia trellis. Malcolm sat down slowly. The listing showed 37 reviews over 18 months. Guests praised the peaceful neighborhood, the wine basket, and the reliable internet. Jordan looked at him. She was selling your Wi-Fi. Malcolm stared at the screen, not angry at first, just stunned by the arrogance of it. Vanessa had called the police on him for installing a router while charging strangers to use the connection she had taken from his house. He saved every page, captured the metadata, and called an old colleague named Denise Carter, a cybersecurity attorney who had once represented the hospital after a vendor exposed patient information. Denise came over Saturday morning, read the logs, examined the listing, and listened without interrupting. When Malcolm finished, she leaned back and said, "She did not just borrow your internet. She used unauthorized access to support a commercial operation. And if Craig used his position to avoid inspecting their rental while inspecting your home in retaliation, they have created problems in 3 different directions." Malcolm asked what they should do. Denise held up one finger. "Nothing public. Not yet. We verify, preserve, and let them keep talking. People like Vanessa are most useful when they believe they are winning." Malcolm installed a secure gateway, encrypted his storage drives, and created a separate monitored guest network using the same name as the old unsecured connection. It still provided internet access, but now every device that entered left a clear timestamp and digital fingerprint. Within 48 hours, Vanessa's iPad connected again, followed by 2 unfamiliar phones and a laptop named Brian MacBook. That same Friday evening, a blue sedan parked outside Vanessa's house, and a young couple carried suitcases through the basement entrance. Jordan filmed from Malcolm's upstairs window, careful to capture only what was visible from their property. On Sunday morning, the devices disappeared from the network at almost the exact moment the couple loaded their luggage back into the car. The evidence was no longer a suspicion, it was a schedule. Vanessa, meanwhile, mistook Malcolm's silence for surrender. At the neighborhood potluck, she stood beside the dessert table and announced that certain residents had resisted basic transparency, then looked directly at Malcolm as if expecting him to explode. He set down his paper plate and asked, "Vanessa, how many people are currently using your home internet?" Her face changed, just slightly. "I do not see how that is relevant." Malcolm smiled. "Neither did I." Then he walked back to the grill, leaving her surrounded by neighbors who suddenly looked interested in the question. 2 days later, Officer Bell called. A business traveler who had stayed in an unregistered rental near Hawthorne Glen had reported suspicious access to files on his work laptop, and the cybercrime unit had traced the connection to Malcolm's old network. Bell's voice became careful. "Mr. Peel, Reed, we need to speak in person." Malcolm looked across the street at Vanessa's basement door, then at Jordan, who was watching him from the kitchen table. "Is she in trouble?" Jordan asked. Malcolm closed the black notebook and stood. "Not yet," he said, "but she finally invited the right people inside." Officer Bell arrived that afternoon with Detective Lena Ortiz from the cybercrime unit, and they sat at Malcolm's kitchen table beneath the clock Evelyn had bought at a flea market because she liked the way it ticked too loudly. Ortiz placed a folder beside the sugar bowl and explained that the traveler, a medical equipment salesman named Daniel Mercer, had stayed in Vanessa's basement for 3 nights, and during that visit, someone had attempted to open confidential files on his laptop through the local network. The investigation showed his device had connected to Malcolm's old Wi-Fi, along with more than 80 other guest devices over the previous 18 months. Malcolm listened without moving, but inside him, something cold was spreading. Those strangers had not just used his bandwidth, they had entered the digital rooms of his home. The folders containing tax records, family photographs, Jordan's school documents, and Evelyn's medical files from the final year of her life. Ortiz told him the basement rental had no permit, no separate fire exit, no occupancy registration, and no record of local lodging taxes. Craig had apparently signed an internal inspection exemption on his own property, then used his county badge to inspect Malcolm's home after Vanessa complained. Denise arrived before the officers left, and when she heard everything, she closed Malcolm's notebook and said, "We are done waiting." Over the next 10 days, the case grew faster than Vanessa's confidence could shrink. Denise filed complaints with the county tax office, the state inspector licensing board, and the local short-term rental enforcement division. Officer Bell gathered statements from Tasha, the Parker family, the Holloways, and a retired police sergeant named Calvin Ross, who admitted Vanessa had once reported his doorbell cameras as illegal neighborhood surveillance. Then Vanessa made the mistake that turned a strong case into a public disaster. She filed for a restraining order against Malcolm, accusing him of cyberstalking, electronic harassment, and directing signals at her home. A deputy served the paperwork on a Saturday morning while Jordan sat at the kitchen table eating cereal. Vanessa stood across the street filming with her phone, smiling, like she had finally captured the ending she wanted. Jordan watched the deputy leave, then looked at Malcolm. "Are we in trouble?" Malcolm sat beside him. "No, son, but someone is trying very hard to make us feel that way." Jordan stared into his cereal. "It feels the same." Malcolm had no answer for that. He went outside and sat beside Evelyn's gardenias until the anger in his hand stopped shaking. For the first time, he considered selling the house, moving closer to Simone, leaving Hawthorne Glen and every beige wall in it behind. Then he touched the wooden trellis Evelyn had built with him, remembered her standing there with dirt on her cheek, and called Denise instead. 3 nights later, Vanessa called 911 again. She claimed Malcolm was directing electronic signals at her television and violating the restraining order without leaving his porch. 2 officers arrived and found him reading a paperback novel under the porch light. There was no interference, no contact, and no violation. When the officers told Vanessa they could not take action, she followed them into the street, flushed from wine and fury. Neighbors drifted outside, pretending to check sprinklers and walk dogs. Vanessa pointed at Malcolm. "You think you are smarter than everyone because you have liars and computers," she shouted. Malcolm remained in his doorway, hands at his sides. Jordan quietly placed his phone against the window and began recording. Officer Bell's warning had taught them both that evidence mattered more than outrage. Vanessa stepped closer. "Why do you not go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of? We did not have these problems before people like you started moving in and acting like you belong here." The entire street went silent. Even Craig looked away. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, a retired teacher who had spent months avoiding conflict, stood on her porch with one hand over her mouth. Malcolm looked at the officers, then at the small red light on his doorbell camera. "I trust you heard that," he said. Then he looked at Vanessa. "You just gave me everything I needed." He closed the door gently. The annual Hawthorne Glen cookout was scheduled for the following Saturday, and Malcolm insisted it continue exactly as planned. He stood behind the grill wearing Evelyn's old apron. Jordan managed the drink cooler, and Simone drove in from Charlotte with peach cobbler and the expression of a woman prepared to defend her father with both legal vocabulary and a serving spoon. 40 residents gathered beneath rented canopies while children ran through sprinklers and smoke from hickory charcoal drifted across the cul-de-sac. Vanessa arrived in a white pantsuit carrying a glass casserole dish and the clipboard she used whenever she wanted to appear official. At 4:30, Officer Bell and Detective Ortiz parked near the entrance. 5 minutes later, the county tax investigator arrived. Then came a representative from the state licensing board, followed by Denise and a local television reporter named Claire Benton, whose consumer investigations had ended more than one dishonest business in Wake County. Vanessa finally stopped smiling. Denise stood near the projector screen and asked for everyone's attention. The tax investigator handed Craig a formal audit notice covering more than $50,000 in undeclared rental income, unpaid lodging taxes, penalties, and interest. The licensing representative suspended his inspection credentials immediately for self-dealing and retaliatory use of county authority. Detective Ortiz then announced that the Ashby household had used Malcolm's private network to operate an unauthorized rental for 18 months, exposing his personal files to 87 guest devices. Jordan connected Malcolm's laptop to the projector, and the screen displayed the connection timeline, the cached rental listing, Vanessa's iPad, Craig's work laptop, and the bold promise of fast Wi-Fi included. Claire Benton walked toward Vanessa with a microphone. "Mrs. Opeledo. Whitmore, why were you charging guests to use your neighbor's internet while calling police on him for installing his own router?" Vanessa's casserole slipped from her hands and shattered on the pavement, red sauce spreading between the folding chairs. She pointed at Malcolm and screamed that she was the victim, that he had been spying on her, that the entire investigation was harassment. Malcolm removed Evelyn's apron, folded it over a chair, and walked forward. His voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned in. "You used my internet, sold it to strangers, exposed my wife's medical records, and then called the police when I changed my own password. I did not break into your network. Vanessa, you entered mine. And when you invited the police to investigate me, they found you. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Calvin Ross began clapping. Tasha joined him, then the Parkers, the Holloways, Simone, Jordan, and finally nearly the whole neighborhood. Craig sat in a folding chair staring at the county badge he had been ordered to surrender. Vanessa looked at him and said, "Do something." He did not even raise his head. 3 months later, Vanessa pleaded guilty to filing false reports and unauthorized computer access. Craig resigned before the county could fire him, and their combined taxes, penalties, legal costs, and settlement payments forced them to sell the house. Malcolm received $42,000 in the civil settlement, and he used part of it to start a free neighborhood program, helping seniors secure their routers and protect their personal data. Mrs. Hayes was his first appointment. She apologized for remaining silent when Vanessa targeted him, and Malcolm changed her factory password without making her beg for forgiveness. The new owners of Vanessa's house were a young family with a baby, a rescue dog, and a Wi-Fi network named Mind Your Own Bandwidth. Malcolm saw the name on his device list and laughed so hard Jordan thought something was wrong. That autumn, Malcolm planted a red climbing rose beside Evelyn's gardenias. Jordan asked what kind it was. Malcolm pressed the soil around its roots and said, "It is called patience." Jordan smiled. "Because patience wins?" Malcolm shook his head. "No. Patience gives the truth enough time to arrive. So tell me, was Malcolm right to wait and build his case? Or should he have exposed Vanessa the moment he saw her devices on his network? Leave your opinion in the comments. Share this story with someone who has dealt with a neighbor who thought intimidation was authority. And subscribe, because the next story begins with a woman trying to tow a disabled veteran's van from his own driveway. And trust me, she picked the wrong man.